The moment my brother walked into my apartment without knocking, using a key I never gave him, I knew things had gone too far. He just stood in my kitchen, helping himself to my coffee, looking around like he was assessing the place. My daughter, Lily, was doing homework at the table. She looked up startled. He didn't even acknowledge her. "Nice place," he said. "No, hello. Not sorry for walking in. Just nice place, like he was a landlord doing a walkthrough." That was 8 months ago. And what happened after that? The things my own family said to me in my own home about me and my daughter, I still can't fully process it without my hands shaking. But I need to start from the beginning, because if I just told you the ending, you'd ask the same question everyone else does. Why did it take so long? The honest answer is that when you grow up being told you're the difficult one, the ungrateful one, the one who always makes things harder than they need to be, you spend a very long time trying to prove that you're not. I'm 31. I work as a registered nurse at a hospital outside of Columbus, Ohio. I've been doing it for 7 years, through nights and weekends and holidays. Through a pregnancy I handled mostly alone. Through a divorce that left me with a toddler, a car payment, and zero emotional support from the people who were supposed to love me most. I bought my apartment 3 years ago, a 2-bedroom on the second floor of a building I love with a little balcony where Lily and I eat breakfast on weekends. I was proud of that purchase in a way I couldn't fully explain to people. It wasn't just square footage. It was proof that I'd built something real, on my own, without anyone's help. My family made sure to remind me that they could have helped, if I'd only asked. My parents live about 40 minutes away in the house I grew up in. My brother, 3 years older than me, has lived with them, off and on, for most of his adult life. He's had ideas. That's always been how my parents described it. Your brother has ideas? Restaurant concepts, app prototypes, a wellness brand that lasted about 4 months. Each one launched with my parents' excitement and ended with a quiet financial hole they never fully acknowledged. Growing up, I was the one who got a part-time job at 16 to pay for my own school clothes. My brother got a car for his 17th birthday. When I got into the nursing program, my parents said they were proud, but couldn't help with tuition. Money was tight. When my brother decided to take a gap year after barely graduating high school, they funded his trip to Portland because he needed to find himself. I found myself on a payment plan with my university. I don't say any of this to sound bitter. I said it to myself for years. Don't be bitter, don't be the difficult one, and swallowed it. I got good at swallowing things. When I was 24, my grandmother passed away. She was my dad's mother, and she and I had always been close in a way that was different from the rest of the family. She used to call me her steady girl. After she died, we found out she'd left me something in her will. $40,000. Not a fortune, but more money than I'd ever seen at one time. Enough to pay down my student loans and half a cushion. Enough to breathe. My parents sat me down 2 weeks after the funeral. My dad did most of the talking. He explained that they were in a difficult position. Some issues with the house, property taxes that had gotten behind, a situation with my brother's most recent business that had created some debt. He said they needed help. He said it was temporary. He said the family needed to stick together. My mom sat beside him and nodded. I asked about my grandmother's money. My dad said it would be paid back within 2 years, with interest if I wanted. Though he said that last part with a tone that suggested wanting interest would be tacky. I was 24. I'd spent my whole life trying not to be the difficult one, and my dad had just cried a little, not a lot, just enough, while talking about my grandmother who had been dead for 16 days. I signed over the money. I want to be honest about that moment, because I know what people think when they hear it. How could you be that naive? I've asked myself the same thing. But it wasn't naivety exactly. It was something more like exhaustion. I'd been fighting the current of that family my whole life. And I was tired, and my grandmother was dead, and my dad was crying, and saying no felt like the cruelest possible thing I could do. So I said yes, and I told myself it was alone. It was not alone. The years after that had a pattern. Things would be okay for a while. I'd be busy with work. My parents and I would have normal conversations. We'd see each other on holidays. And then something would happen. My brother would have a new idea that needed seed money. My parents would have a bill they couldn't cover. And somehow the conversation would circle back to me. Could I help? Just temporarily. Just until things stabilized. I helped, not always with money. Sometimes it was picking up groceries, driving my mom to appointments, covering a car insurance payment when they were short. Small things that individually seemed manageable. I didn't add them up. I didn't want to know the total. I got married at 27 and divorced at 29. I won't go into the details of the marriage except to say that it was another situation where I'd ignored what I knew in my gut because I didn't want to be the person who made things difficult. My daughter Lily was born when I was 28. She was, and is, the clearest thing in my life. When her father and I separated, I focused on her with everything I had. I got the apartment. I made a life. My parents were supportive in the way that people are supportive when it costs them nothing. Lots of phone calls. Lots of "we're here for you." When I needed actual help, someone to watch Lily while I worked an overnight shift, my mom was often busy. When I needed to talk about the divorce, conversations somehow shifted back to my brother's latest setbacks. I stopped expecting much. That was its own kind of grief. About 2 years ago, my parents called with something bigger. They were behind on their mortgage, significantly behind. The house was at risk. They needed $22,000 to get current and cover some penalties. My brother had recently moved back in with them after his wellness brand collapsed. So there were 3 adults in the house generating effectively one income, which was my dad's disability check. I didn't have $22,000 in cash, but I had equity in my apartment and a decent credit score, and I could take out a personal loan. I know. I know. I keep coming back to that version of myself and wanting to shake her. But here's what I tell myself now, and what I think is actually true. I was afraid. Not of losing the money. I was afraid of being the reason my parents lost their home. I was afraid of being at Christmas dinner 5 years later and knowing that I could have prevented it. I was afraid that if I didn't help, I would be exactly what they'd always quietly implied I was. Selfish. Cold. Too focused on herself. I took out the loan. I paid the $22,000. I asked for nothing in writing. My brother said thank you exactly once in a text message. 6 months later, my parents' car died. They needed a reliable vehicle. My mom had medical appointments. My dad needed to get to physical therapy. I couldn't afford to buy them a car, but I let them use mine on weekends sometimes, and I helped them with a down payment on a used Honda. Another $3,500. I started keeping a note in my phone. Just numbers. No labels, no emotion. Just the amounts and dates. I don't know exactly why I started doing it. Maybe some part of me understood what was coming. Last spring, my brother told my parents he'd found a business partner and had a new concept, a food truck. My parents were excited in the way they always were at the beginning of his ideas. Fresh start energy. They started talking about it at every family dinner, asking me what I thought, whether I knew anything about food licensing in Ohio. I smiled and said I didn't know much about that. I noticed my brother never actually asked me for anything related to the truck. He was talking to other people about investment. I let myself feel hopeful that this one didn't involve me. I was wrong. In July, my brother and his business partner had a falling out. The truck deal collapsed before it even got off the ground. He was out a few $1,000s in deposits and planning costs. He was devastated. Genuinely, I think. He moved back into my parents' house for the 3rd time in 5 years. My parents absorbed it the way they always did, shuffled around to make room, rearranged their lives. 3 weeks later, my dad called and asked if my brother could stay with me for a while. I said no. For the first time in my adult life, I said no. There was a pause on the phone that felt like it lasted a full minute. My dad said, "He just needs stability right now." I said, "I understand that, but I can't have him staying here. I have Lily, and I have a 1-bedroom. I'd gotten a smaller place by then to reduce my own expenses, and it's not a good fit." My dad's voice changed. Not angry. Not yet. Just cooler. He said they'd figure something out. I thought that was the end of it. 2 weeks later, my brother showed up at my apartment with a bag. He said he'd been talking to my mom, and she told him it was fine, that I'd come around. I had not come around. I had not spoken to my mom since I'd said no to my dad. She had relayed to my brother a version of events that had not happened. I told my brother he couldn't stay. He argued. He said I was being cruel, that he was family, that this was a temporary situation, that I had space. We went around it for 20 minutes in my doorway. Lily was in the other room. I could hear her TV turned up, which meant she was listening. He left. But he didn't let it go. Over the next month, there were calls. From my mom, mostly, but sometimes from my dad. The conversations had a script. My brother was struggling. Family sticks together. I had more than most people in this situation. Couldn't I find it in myself to help? I started noticing something in those conversations. The way my contributions were never acknowledged. The $40,000. The $22,000. The $30,500. The years of grocery runs and airport pickups and covered bills, none of it existed. In the story my parents were telling, I was someone with resources who was choosing, selfishly, to withhold them. I asked my mom once, directly, "Can we talk about the money I've already given over the years?" She said, "We've always done what we could for you too." I asked her to name something specific. There was a long silence. Then she said I was being confrontational. I let it go, but I wrote down the date of that conversation in my notes app, next to all the numbers. The situation changed in October. My parents' landlord. They'd actually sold the family home 2 years prior and were renting. Something I hadn't fully processed. Informed them their lease wasn't being renewed. They had 60 days to find a new place. My dad's health had declined and he was no longer able to do physical therapy out of the house. My brother was still unemployed. My mom called and said they needed to move in with me. Not asked. Said. I told her I needed time to think about it. She said there wasn't much time. I said I understood that, but I still needed to think. She said, "You're our daughter. This is what families do." I didn't say yes. I also didn't say no. Not that night. I spent 3 days barely sleeping, running the numbers, thinking about Lily, thinking about what it would mean to have 3 extra people in a 2-bedroom apartment. Thinking about what I owed versus what I'd already given versus what had ever been given to me. I called my dad and said I was sorry, but it wasn't going to work. I could help them find a place. I could contribute to a security deposit, but they could not move in with me. My mom stopped calling for 2 weeks. Then my brother called. His tone was different from my mom's. It wasn't pleading, it was hard. He said I was abandoning the family. He said I'd always thought I was better than them. He said everything I'd built was possible because of them, because of the sacrifices they'd made when I was growing up. I asked him what sacrifices, specifically. He said, "You know what you're doing." I said I don't, actually. "Can you tell me?" He hung up. I went back to that notes app. I added up everything. I had given my family, over 7 years, approximately $68,000 in direct money, not counting time, not counting in-kind help, not counting the emotional labor of being the person who holds things together without acknowledgement. $68,000. That was more than my first 2 years of nursing salary combined. I sat with that number for a long time. My parents found temporary housing, a short-term rental through a family friend. They were settled, not comfortably, but they were housed. My brother was with them. In late November, they asked me to come for Thanksgiving. I went. I told myself it would be fine, that things had cooled, that we could have a normal holiday. We were in the middle of dinner when my dad put down his fork and looked at me across the table. He said, "You know you're the reason we're in this situation." I said, "What do you mean?" He said if I had helped when they needed it, if I had let them stay, things wouldn't have gotten this hard. He said I had more than I needed and I was choosing to hoard it while my family struggled. He said Lily was growing up watching me be selfish, and that was going to affect her. My mom didn't say anything. She looked at her plate. My brother nodded slowly, like my dad was articulating something they'd all agreed on privately. I felt something shift in me that I don't have a great word for. Not rage. It was quieter than that. It was a feeling of a decision being made, somewhere below the level of conscious thought. I said, "I'd like to talk about the $40,000 my grandmother left me." My dad said that was old history. I said, "Okay, I'd like to talk about the $22,000 I borrowed against my apartment to save your house." My brother said, "You didn't have to do that." I said, "You're right. I didn't." My mom said, "Can we please not do this at dinner?" I said, "I've added it up. $68,37 over 7 years. And right now, you're telling me that I'm selfish. You're saying I'm hoarding. You're saying I'm raising my daughter to be like me. In what world does that make sense to you?" My dad's face did something complicated. He said I was twisting things. He said that's what I always did. Made myself the victim, when really I was the one with power in this family. He said you and Lily have always just taken without giving back. I looked at my daughter. She was 11. She was very still. I looked back at my dad. I said, "I need you to hear me say this clearly. I have given this family $68,000 and years of my time, and I have never once been thanked. I am done. And I need you all to know that I'm done. Not angry done, Not "I'll cool off" done. Actually done. Nobody said anything. I got up, helped Lily put her coat on, and we left. In the car, Lily asked me if I was okay. I told her I was. She said, "You didn't yell." I said, "No, I didn't." She said, "Good." We drove home in the dark, and I let her pick the music, and she picked something from a playlist I didn't recognize, and it was actually pretty good. In January, I sent my parents a letter. Not a text, not an email. An actual letter that I spent 2 weeks writing. I laid out everything. The money. The dates. The requests I'd fulfilled, and the one I'd finally declined. I told them I loved them, and I also told them I was not available to be a financial resource or an emotional punching bag. I told them that Lily and I were doing well, and that I hoped they would be too, and that if they ever wanted a relationship with me that was based on something other than what I could give them, I was open to that conversation. My mom responded with a card. It said she missed me, and things had gotten complicated. She didn't address anything in the letter specifically. My dad didn't respond at all. My brother sent a text that said, "Okay." I put the card in a drawer and went back to my life. Here's what that looks like now. I wake up and make coffee, and Lily comes out of her room still half asleep, and we sit on the balcony when it's warm enough. I go to work, and I take care of people who are having some of the hardest moments of their lives, and I'm good at it, and I know I'm good at it, and I know I'm good at it. I come home, I pay my bills. I have a savings account that's actually growing for the first time in years. I have a friend who comes over on Friday nights and we watch terrible television, and she's been asking me for months why I seem lighter than I used to. The answer is that I stopped carrying something that was never mine to carry. I still think about my grandmother. I think about what she intended when she left me that money. I think she would have understood what I did with it. The years of trying. The $40,000 that disappeared into someone else's choices. And I think she would have told me that the steady girl she knew had been there all along, just buried under everyone else's emergencies. I found her again. It took longer than it should have, but she was there. There's a specific kind of quiet that happens after you finally say the true thing out loud. Not loud, not dramatic, just honest. That's what I remember most about that Thanksgiving. Not my dad's face, not my brother's slow nod. The quiet after I said $68,000. Like the number took up all the air in the room. I used to think that staying silent was the kind thing to do, that absorbing the cost, money, time, dignity was what good daughters did. What I understand now is that silence isn't kindness when it enables something harmful. Every time I handed over money without asking for accountability, I was participating in a dynamic that hurt all of us. My parents never had to reckon with the consequences of their choices because I kept catching them. My brother never had to build real resilience because there was always a safety net shaped like me. And I never had to ask myself what I actually deserved because I was too busy managing everyone else's emergencies. That's the thing about cause and effect that nobody talks about honestly in families. It runs in both directions. The harm done to me was real. But the way I responded to that harm, with compliance, with silence, with $68,000 I kept no formal record of, made the next harm more likely. I'm not saying I was responsible for what they did. I'm saying that when I finally changed my behavior, the dynamic had to change too. That's just how it works. What I had to build, slowly and without much fanfare, was a kind of internal compass that didn't need their approval to function. For most of my 20s, I was making decisions based on what would keep the peace, what would make me look like the good one, what would prevent me from being called selfish. That's not a moral life, that's just management. Real integrity, I've learned, is the thing you do when no one is watching, and nothing is at stake except your own sense of yourself. When I took out that personal loan for $22,000, I told myself it was the right thing to do. It wasn't. It was the familiar thing, and I'd confused the two for years. The smarter version of me, the one I'm still becoming, asks different questions. Not what does this family need from me right now, but what is actually true about this situation, and what does the truth require? That shift took time. It required me to look clearly at patterns I'd spent years softening with excuses. It required me to stop mistaking familiarity for love and obligation for connection. And then there was Lily. She said I didn't yell. She said good. She was 11 years old, and she already understood something. It took me 3 decades to learn. That the most powerful response to someone trying to diminish you is steady, clear, unafraid calm. I want her to grow up knowing that you can hold your ground without becoming cold. That you can love people and still have limits. That strength isn't about how loud you are. It's about how clearly you know yourself when someone is trying to make you doubt it. I found my grandmother's steady girl again. She was never really gone. She was just waiting for me to stop apologizing for taking up space.